In the heart of France, amidst the serene beauty of an old village, lived a blind nun. She had lost her eyesight completely, but was known for her deep faith and unwavering devotion to Christianity. Despite her disability, she radiated an inner strength that inspired many in her community. However, one fateful evening, her life took an unexpected and terrifying turn. Two young men, reckless and intoxicated, spotted the nun as she prepared to leave the church. These were not ordinary troublemakers. They were known in the village for their rebellious nature, often indulging in vices that brought shame to their father, a well-respected priest. Blinded by their desires, they saw the nun not as a woman of faith, but as an opportunity to satisfy their dark impulses. Taking advantage of her blindness, they silently followed her, waiting for the right moment to strike. The night was quiet, the streets deserted, making it easy for them to carry out their wicked plan. As she stepped outside the church premises, they suddenly grabbed her, covering her mouth to stifle her screams. Her heart pounded in terror as she struggled against their grip, but her frail body was no match for their strength. The men forcefully dragged her into their car, tying her hands and covering her face with a cloth. She kicked and screamed, hoping that someone, anyone, would hear her and come to her rescue. But the world outside remained silent. The nun, usually calm and collected, now felt true helplessness for the first time. As the car sped away, she realized that she was at the mercy of two men whose intentions she could only imagine. Panic surged through her veins, and she whispered silent prayers, her faith being her only anchor in this moment of despair. God, if you can hear me, protect me. Do not let me fall into the hands of evil. The two young men laughed cruelly, their minds clouded by intoxication. They thought they had the upper hand, that their victim was too weak to resist, but they were unaware that fate had a different plan for all of them. The blind nun was not just an ordinary woman. Despite losing her eyesight completely, she possessed an extraordinary sense of wisdom and faith. She had spent her entire life in the small village in France, where she had grown up surrounded by the teachings of Christianity. The church in the heart of the village was not just a place of worship for her, it was her second home. From a young age, she had been mentored by the village priest, who had taught her the scriptures, religious philosophies, and moral lessons. Though she could not read the Bible herself, she had memorized large portions of it by simply listening. Her sharp mind absorbed every word, and over the years, she had become well-versed in theological teachings. Her ability to grasp complex religious concepts without sight was nothing short of a miracle. As time passed, the priest recognized her deep understanding and devotion and assigned her a new role at the church, teaching young children about Christianity. Every evening, children from the village would gather at the church, eagerly listening to her as she recited stories of faith, kindness, and righteousness. She taught them about the importance of morality, the power of prayer, and the essence of devotion. But it wasn't just children who sought her guidance. Many villagers would often visit her, seeking answers to their spiritual and personal dilemmas. Despite her blindness, she spoke with wisdom beyond her years, and her words carried a sense of conviction that touched the hearts of those who listened. People were astonished by her intelligence. How could a blind woman who had never seen the world possess such deep insight? For many in the village, she was nothing less than a miracle, a woman who had overcome physical limitations to become a beacon of light for others. Her presence in the church was a testament to the power of faith, and the respect she earned among the people was unparalleled. Little did she know that her peaceful life in the church was about to take a dark and unexpected turn, one that would test not just her faith, but her very existence. The priest of the church was a man of great integrity and kindness. He was deeply respected in the village for his wisdom and devotion to faith. However, despite his noble character, he bore a great burden, his two rebellious twin sons. These young men, aged 18 and 19, were notorious for their reckless behavior, indulgence in vices, and defiance of moral values. Their actions brought shame upon their father, and he often struggled to keep them on the right path. The priest, exhausted by their disobedience and troubling habits, finally decided to take strict measures. One day, after catching them in yet another act of misconduct, he brought them to the church. With a stern voice, he warned them that their days of irresponsibility were over. From that day forward, he declared, they would be learning religious teachings from the nun. His hope was that her wisdom and piety would inspire them to change their ways. However, his decision had unforeseen consequences. The moment the twins laid eyes on the nun, something changed within them. She was beautiful, with an almost ethereal presence despite her blindness. Her serene nature and soft-spoken wisdom captivated them, but not in the way their father had intended. Lust clouded their judgment, and their fascination quickly turned into something dark and dangerous. Realizing that she was blind, they saw it as an opportunity, an advantage. If she couldn't see, she couldn't resist them the same way others could. Their admiration for her soon turned into a predatory obsession, and they began plotting how to take advantage of her vulnerability. Unaware of their true intentions, the nun continued her duties, oblivious to the looming danger. She had no idea that the priest's effort to reform his sons would instead push her into the most terrifying ordeal of her life. It was a quiet evening at the church, and the blind nun was preparing to leave for home after another day of teaching and prayer. The sun had long set, and most of the villagers had already retired to their homes. She sat alone, gathering her things, unaware that she was being watched. The priest's twin sons, consumed by their dark desires, had been waiting for the perfect moment. Tonight, in a drunken state, they finally decided to act. The opportunity was too tempting. She was alone, vulnerable, and completely unaware of the danger lurking in the shadows. As she took her first step toward the door, they struck. One of them grabbed her from behind, clamping a hand over her mouth, while the other bound her hands with rope, preventing her from resisting. She thrashed and kicked, screaming for help, but the church was deserted. No one heard her cries. With ruthless efficiency, they forced her into their car, muffling her protests as they drove away into the cold, dark night. The nun's heart pounded in terror. Who were these men? Where were they taking her? What did they want? After what felt like an eternity, the car came to a stop. The brothers dragged her into an abandoned apartment complex far away from the village. It was a rundown building isolated from the rest of civilization. No one would hear her pleas for mercy here. Inside the dimly lit room, the nun was thrown onto the cold, hard floor. The realization of her helplessness struck her with full force. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of her blindness like never before. Tears streamed down her face as she sobbed, "If only I could see. If only I knew where I was. If only someone could save me." But no one came. She curled into herself, trembling, praying desperately for a miracle, unaware that fate was about to take a turn that would change her life forever. The next morning, a wave of panic and sorrow swept across the entire village. The blind nun was missing. News of her disappearance spread like wildfire, and soon the entire community was shaken. Her parents were devastated, their worst fears taking hold as they desperately searched for their daughter. Tears streamed down their faces as they knocked on doors, asking everyone if they had seen her, but no one had. The village elders, too, were deeply disturbed. The nun was not just an ordinary woman to them. She was a miracle, a symbol of faith and wisdom, and now she was gone without a trace. As the panic grew, people rushed to the church, hoping for answers. The priest, equally worried, stood at the altar, his heart heavy with fear. When questioned, he had no explanation. He had seen her the evening before, but after that, she had vanished. The villagers turned to the children she taught, hoping they might know something. But the answer was the same. We saw her yesterday, but after that, we don't know where she went. The search efforts intensified, but no sign of the nun could be found. Every street, every corner, and every possible place was checked, but it was as if she had been swallowed by the darkness of the night. Fear and uncertainty gripped the village. Where could she be? What had happened to her? And most importantly, would they ever see her again? The atmosphere inside the abandoned apartment was thick, with an eerie sense of danger and despair. The twin brothers, drunk and reckless, sat across from the helpless blind nun, their intentions now shamelessly clear. Bottles of alcohol cluttered the room, their stench mixing with the thick air, making the place feel suffocating. With wicked grins, they spoke in vile, degrading words, discussing in disturbing detail what they intended to do to her. Their laughter echoed against the walls, their voices dripping with arrogance, as if they believed they had already won. The nun, sitting in the corner of the dimly lit room, felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. She had never known fear like this before. Her entire body trembled, not just from the cold, but from the horror of what was about to unfold. Tears began to flow uncontrollably from her sightless eyes. She was alone, vulnerable, and trapped in the darkest moment of her life. But even as fear consumed her, a spark of faith remained within her heart. With her hands tied and her voice shaky, she turned her heart to the unseen power that she had always believed in. "O creator of this universe, whoever you are, please help me. Protect me from these evil men. Do not let me be dishonored at their hands. I do not want to be defiled by them." She wept as she poured out her soul, begging for a miracle. Her mind was clouded, her thoughts racing, but deep down she knew this was a test of her faith. And then a realization struck her. Whoever answered her call for help tonight, she would devote herself to following that path. Her prayer was not just a plea for safety, it was a vow, a promise to embrace the truth shown to her by the one who would come to her rescue. As she whispered her desperate prayers, something unexpected happened. A noise outside, a presence approaching. Little did she know her prayers had been heard, and help was already on the way. Just as the nun's worst fears were about to come true, she broke down completely, her body trembling, her voice rising in desperation. Tears streamed down her face, and with every ounce of strength she had left, she screamed for help. The drunken twins laughed at her helplessness, amused by her cries. But fate had other plans. Suddenly, a loud crashing sound echoed through the apartment. The door burst open. Before the nun could process what was happening, she heard shouts of rage. A deep, commanding voice filled the room. The next moment, the sound of fists striking flesh took over. Panic and pain replaced the laughter of the twin brothers as they cried out in agony. The nun, still blind, had no idea who had come to her rescue, but she could hear the struggle, the sound of someone fighting off her attackers with an unshakable force. Within moments, the room fell silent. The danger was gone. Then she felt a gentle touch on her bound hands. The ropes that had kept her captive loosened and fell away. She sobbed uncontrollably, turning towards her savior, her voice trembling. "Who are you? Have you come to protect me?" A calm, reassuring voice answered. "Do not be afraid, my child. You are safe now." The man who had saved her was an elderly figure dressed in white robes, his long white beard radiating a soft glow in the dimly lit room. Even though the nun could not see him, she could feel the purity in his presence. There was something divine about him, something that made her heart feel at peace for the first time since she had been taken. He placed a hand on her head, his voice kind yet firm. "You are like a daughter to me. No harm will come to you. I will take you with me, and you will be safe." At the sound of the word daughter, a wave of relief washed over her. For the first time since her ordeal began, she felt a sense of security, a warmth she had never known before. Without hesitation, she trusted him, allowing him to guide her away from the nightmare she had just escaped. Little did she know, her journey had only just begun. The man who had rescued the nun was not an ordinary person. He was the imam of a nearby mosque. Every day he walked along this path on his way to the house of prayer, devoted to his faith and the service of his community. But tonight his journey had taken an unexpected turn. He had saved a helpless woman from the clutches of evil. Now, as they sat inside his modest home, the blind nun sobbed uncontrollably, still shaken from the horrors she had endured. The imam sat beside her, offering her water, speaking to her in a calm, fatherly tone. "You are safe now, child. No one will hurt you any more." Between her deep, trembling breaths, the nun finally spoke. She recounted everything, the pain, the terror, and the helplessness. But then her voice steadied and she uttered the words that would change her life forever. "Before I was taken, I made a promise. I told myself that whoever came to my rescue, I would follow their path." The imam listened intently, his wise eyes filled with understanding. He took a deep breath and replied, "My child, do you not see? Allah has chosen you for guidance. He has placed goodness in your heart and led you to the truth." The nun's lips trembled as she whispered, I do not know anything about Islam. I was raised as a scholar of my own faith, and I have spent my life teaching it to others. But now my heart is restless. I feel as if I was meant to be here." The imam nodded, his voice full of gentleness and wisdom. "Islam is a path of peace, of truth, of devotion to the one Creator. I do not ask you to accept it blindly, but if you wish, I can teach you. I can answer your questions, and if your heart finds peace in this path, then you will know that it was meant for you." Tears welled up in the nun's sightless eyes. She had spent her life teaching faith to others, but now, for the first time, she felt like a student. A part of her yearned for answers, for clarity, for something that made sense in the chaos she had just endured. With a deep breath, she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Teach me." And so, under the guidance of the old imam, the nun's journey into Islam began, a journey that would change her faith, her soul, and even her very existence. As the days turned into weeks, the blind nun found herself deeply engrossed in the teachings of Islam. The old imam patiently guided her, answering her questions with wisdom and clarity. She had spent years studying Christianity, yet there were many questions that had remained unanswered, questions that now Islam was addressing in a way that touched her heart. She was amazed by the concept of Tawheed, the absolute oneness of God. The teachings of the Quran resonated with her, filling the void she had long felt but never understood. As she listened to the words of Allah, she felt as if they were speaking directly to her soul. One day she finally made her decision. With tears in her eyes and conviction in her heart, she spoke the words that would forever change her fate. "I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is his messenger." She had embraced Islam, leaving behind the faith she had once taught. But instead of feeling lost, she felt found. Her devotion only grew stronger with time. She began memorizing the Quran, cherishing every verse as she repeated them. The Imam also introduced her to a special supplication, a powerful name of Allah that he asked her to recite every night before sleeping. "Do this every night," he told her, "and one day you will witness its miracle with your own eyes." Though she did not understand what miracle awaited her, she held on to his words with unwavering faith. Every night, before drifting into sleep, she whispered the name of Allah, believing that one day something extraordinary would happen. She was waiting for a miracle, and soon she would receive one. 2 years had passed since the blind nun disappeared. In the small village, her absence had left a deep void. Her parents, once filled with hope, had now accepted the painful reality. Their daughter was never coming back. But then, one ordinary afternoon, something extraordinary happened. A young woman dressed in modest yet elegant attire, with a scarf gracefully draped over her head, walked into the village. The townspeople stared in disbelief. There was something familiar about her, the way she carried herself, the softness of her expression. Could it be her? They whispered among themselves, trying to reconcile what they were seeing. Her parents, weak with age and sorrow, looked up, and then froze. Tears welled up in their eyes as they saw the impossible, their daughter, alive, standing before them. Before they could react, the nun suddenly broke into a run, something she had never done before. She rushed straight into their arms, weeping uncontrollably, burying herself in their embrace. The people around gasped. How is she running? How does she know exactly where to go? The realization struck them like lightning. She could see. Amidst the overwhelming emotions, she finally spoke, her voice filled with gratitude and conviction. I have returned, but not as the woman you once knew. I am a Muslim now. I have found the truth, and with it, I have been given back my sight. Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd. What is she saying? How is this possible? The villagers, who had once revered her for her wisdom, now stood in awe for an entirely different reason. She recounted her journey, the darkness, the prayers, the rescue, and the miracle. It was through the remembrance of Allah, the blessed words I was given, that my sight was restored. The villagers were shaken. They had known her as the blind nun, yet here she stood, seeing clearer than ever before. Her words, her transformation, and her miracle were undeniable. The priest, too, was overcome with shock and guilt. His own sons had been responsible for the crime that changed her life. With a heavy heart, he made a decision. He handed his sons over to the police, ensuring that justice would be served. But the greatest shock was yet to come. Many villagers, deeply moved by her story, began questioning their own beliefs. One by one, they embraced Islam, following the nun into a faith that had not only given her light, but had also transformed her very soul.